Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Ilward, and as always, I'm here with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And once again, we feel comfortable saying the world is a noisy place, and as a result of that, we've got no shortage of topics. We had a real robust start, pregame, I guess is what we call it, and it really, Jim came to the table with something that had reminded him about how we first met. And part of that story involves, him struggling with some concussions and the resident effect of those concussions over time, which kind of introduced this concept of, the power of the mind and the brain and then the power of self-talk. And Jim was listening to a podcast, and I've heard a few myself recently. I think this topic is pretty hot. The power of the mind and self-talk, but not just self-talk as a concept, self-talk as a science. Like we have the ability now to look at the brain, to hook things up to the brain and say, if I say nice things to this brain, everything turns green. And if I say bad things to this brain, everything turns red. And I'm oversimplifying that, but we have the ability to say, look, if you talk to yourself positively and you reinforce positive thoughts and you visualize good things, that's no longer just something that might be spiritually a good idea. It's scientifically proven to work. So I threw a lot in there, Jim. Maybe you want to go back to how we met. Maybe you want to start somewhere else. But I think this is a fascinating topic, and we've already had some fun with it. So you go wherever you want to go with it, and we'll
Yeah.
keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the context. Like you said, we'll cover a lot of areas. What inspired this topic for today was a podcast I was listening to, and really impressive from a number of different perspectives. But number one, um, how the host on the podcast, his name was Billy Carson, Secrets Laws of the Universe. So really understanding how the human brain functions and this place that we're at in human evolution. So kind of big picture stuff, but very related to when you and I originally met. And this also came up in a conversation. Somebody asked me how we met, and kind of forgot about the story. It's an interesting story, especially when you tell it 5 years later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's not something I'm particularly not proud, but I don't talk about it much. But I was reached a point in my life where I could tell something wasn't wrong. It was right after COVID or right around COVID, I think, around that time period.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it had something to do with it as well, but I just didn't feel good. There was something not going right in my thoughts, and so started looking at different things, and eventually came across. Oh, that's right. I did some evaluations. Went to the hospital, and they did some asked some questions about that, and then the concussions came up about had I had concussions, and so I had to fill out this list and go through all the times that I had a concussion. Well, the first one was when I was like 19 years old. Actually, the young I was like 18 years. I was still in high school, and you ever see right here on my you have video so you can see it, but you ever see that scar above my eye?
Mm-hmm.
That's yeah. I stuck my head through a windshield at 19 years old. Luckily, at that time, I was playing football and had a 17.5 inch neck, so I didn't hurt the windshield, but I did get knocked out. 60 stitches, almost lost my eye. Should have been dead. No safety belt back then,
Yep.
and so
Yep.
that was concussion. That was the big one, concussion one. But I got playing football, and then back in those days, there was many concussions. It was not a big deal to have a concussion. I was playing football, 3 years of varsity, then rugby. Used to get in a lot of fights. Got knocked out a couple of times in a fight, or got my kicked in the head. So you add all those up, and there's brain trauma, right? Brain damage,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when they thought that was the problem, which certainly didn't help. And I was searching for ways to deal with this, and they don't know much that about the human brain. What they do know, as far as our medical system, is those brain waves are when they're dead, they're dead. They don't come back. It's the cognitive part of that. And that's how I met you, came
Mm-hmm.
across, because really the doctor's conclusion was there's no medication, there's no treatment. Only thing that you can do is maybe retrain the brain waves, and we have many of them that are unused, and retrain new ones, but the old ones are dead, and that's part of the concussion protocol. It's also
Mm-hmm.
part of the NFL concussion protocol, because they can now, for the first time with scans, can look at the brain and see the damage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's hard to know. I don't want to get too much in the science of it, but when we met, that was part of the deal, But I went to Florida. I think you had helped schedule or coordinated with the person you were representing to do these brain scans, and they saw, yeah, there was some separation like that. The bad news is there's nothing they could do. The good news was hyperbaric treatments were one of the solutions and recommendations. So I did 50 hyperbaric treatments. And then I told myself at that point, this is over. I'm no longer going to continue to go to a doctor or take medication to try to deal with this. The power of the mind. I knew the placebo effect alone, that the power of that is equally as effective as the actual medicine itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's 5 years ago. And then since then, of course, meditation, exercise, all those different things. Obviously, I'm functioning well enough to do a podcast, but it really was a decision not to let that affect me the rest of my life. And so, yeah, that's the kickoff. And then I recently listened to this podcast, and this guy was really, really good about the power of vibration, and about meditation and manifestation and self-talk and affirmations, um, self-thought, self-doubt, a self-belief system, past
Mm-hmm.
traumas. Those are all things that are part of the human brain that that we know now that we can deal with a lot of work to create a better world and a more fulfilling life. So,
Yeah, I think no, I really appreciate you kind of retelling that story. And it was so interesting that a podcast that you listened to recently rekindled your memory of how we met. That in itself is pretty cool. Probably a
yeah,
whole episode we could go there. But yeah, I think the way that I tie myself into that, Jim, is, and you know some of this because we've talked for years about some of the stuff I'm doing and some of the stuff you're doing. And you mentioned a bunch of them. I think if I pull the wheel out for us right now and just say, look, in the middle of this thing is the self, and one of the
mhm,
selves is self-talk. You
mhm,
know, all of what you just described, your journey, in my opinion, humbly speaking, began with some level of self-awareness and perhaps some self-reflection. It's like, I don't want to accept the condition that I'm in right now. I'm not really sure what to do, but I'm not going to do nothing. I'm going to
mhm,
investigate. And
mhm,
that began the journey. Maybe that continued the journey. But I think to myself, because I do a lot of meditation and I pray a lot and do visualization, I'm very, very, very
mhm. And
convinced
breath
of
work. I know you do breath
breath
work.
work, of the power of the mind.
Yep.
And I remember, dude, the first time I was ever really conscious of this kind of thing was
Mhm,
sports psychology. And
yep.
it came out like, I don't know what it was, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And only a couple guys were doing it. I think golfers were doing it,
Yep.
and maybe pitchers were doing it. Maybe hockey goalies, guys that really got fucked up in the head easy, right?
Yeah.
And the notion, I remember being in Little League, and I don't know if it was my dad or one of the other coaches say, just envision the catcher's mitt.
Mhm,
Don't look
yep.
at anything else. Just look at the catcher's mitt and think of it as being two, three, maybe even four times as big as it is. And I
Mhm,
remember feeling at one particular moment, I can't see anything else. This thing is so big. How could I possibly miss it? And I struck out like nine guys in a row.
mhm,
And it stuck in my head. And the
yeah.
second memory I have was in high school when I was pitching. And it was something that Roger Clemens had said years before when he stepped on the mound in the World Series. He
Mhm,
couldn't hear anything.
Yeah.
He could complete silence, and all he could see was the catcher's mitt. That began my journey of, hey, this visualization thing, this power of the
Yeah.
mind thing, there's more to this than just a little bit of voodoo. This sounds like it's got a lot of potential, and here we are.
Yeah. In fact, this conversation, again, it was like an hour and a half podcast, went exactly into the area you're talking about. And they call it the zone in sports.
Mm-hmm.
But what they know about the human mind is that it's a vibration. It's a thought that it tells themselves. But it turns out that the human mind, as it sees things, can actually anticipate things. So that's
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about Michael Jordan. What made Michael Jordan so great
Mm-hmm.
was that he actually was uh, function at a different frequency than the competition, and
Mm-hmm.
so his timing, his speed was a few seconds faster than the others, and that's what exactly what you were describing when you were pitching a baseball, or that the greatest athletes, they have athletic ability, but they have a way to their minds could be in the zone in a way
Mm-hmm.
that can anticipate things from actually happening. And then he
But
went into one of the research projects where the human mind actually can anticipate the next screen through they can actually connect the brain, uh,
mm-hmm.
the
Yep.
frequency in relationship to what it sees. And this is just fascinating stuff as far as the science and what it can do. But the
Well, I
sports one
think that,
is
yeah,
absolutely the best example of what we can all relate to. And it
yeah.
doesn't
Well,
mean
you and
that your
I,
life is going to be great after that, but you could be really good at one thing by connecting into the vibration and the presence of that
yeah,
moment.
yeah. Well, I think in my experience, because I've invested a lot of time and energy into this
Mhm.
for a number of years now, and the story about why now and why not before is a whole nother episodic type thing. But I think I am 100% convinced that we are in however much control of our minds as we want to be.
Mhm.
And that it's also, in my experience, kind of like exercise and nutrition. You can't stop doing it. It has to
Mhm.
be little tiny incremental progress over time. And in my practice, as you know, Jim, I do some breath work that's like 10 or 15 minutes every morning. Part of that's visualization. Then I move into some journaling where I do some meditation, and then I do some prayer. And to me,
Mhm.
prayer, the only difference between prayer and meditation to me, and I could be wrong, but it's my opinion, is I'm praying to God, I'm meditating kind of to the universe, right? It's so
Yeah.
it's the same exercise of the mind. It's just got a slightly different direction. And that's not a judgmental comment. That's just an observation.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, he went deep into that and saying, for example, innovation. So it's something obviously I can relate to as an inventor. We're actually not inventing anything new. What we're doing is we're going into the universe and pulling it from the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about prayer a lot because that is meditation. You
Mm-hmm.
have to get your mind to a place where it is connected. I call it you have to calibrate first, right? A calibration to the universe, whether that's could be water, could be sound, could be any of the five senses. Um, it could be vision. And once you calibrate, then you make the body at that point, once it's calm enough, then can start to do alignment into manifesting something, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that is. In sports, it could be that, or in my case as an inventor, I'm I'm not really creating anything new. I'm taking all these things that already exist and aligning them and arranging them in a way that creates something novel, right? That
Yes.
then is going to create
Yes.
something. And yeah, exactly what the conversation was about. So appreciate how you connected it, the secret laws of the universe. And so these are things that we can actually track now with science and brain waves. Um,
Yeah.
in
It's
ways that
it's
were never thinkable or impossible before. It's not the hocus pocus hippie kind of Berkeley stuff that
oh man,
started
I
off with
I
this. Yeah,
actually I fought that stuff. I resented
yeah,
that stuff. I called people crazy for the longest time, but
sure, yeah,
what
yeah.
we know now, whether we've learned it through our children or through our own adult lives or our experience or intellectual curiosity, whatever it is. But look at the things that we know. Like don't watch a blue screen 30 minutes before you go to sleep. Well, why is
Mhm.
that? Well, it's because of
Yeah.
your brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't watch violent movies before you go to sleep. Watch a
Mhm.
comedy if you're going to watch anything at all, but you're better off reading a book. And what
Mhm.
about sleeping with, blinders on or dark shades? I mean, music and meditative chants and there's all of these external influences that you can bring in to your point. You can use them you can make them your own because God knows how many things I've listened to. I'm like, don't like that, don't like that. Ooh, that was nice. I'm going to listen to that. And then it becomes part of my routine. But it's all around exercising the mind in a positive fashion. And
Mhm.
then the next step for me is, wow, I actually have control in that regard to some extent of my own peace of mind.
Mhm.
Therefore, maybe even my own level of happiness. Like this is not out of my reach. I have something to do with this. And that's, to me, that's a revelation.
Yeah, yeah, and it also ties back to he was referring to a frequency, but also the vibration. And we've talked about this before, how you
Mm-hmm.
can walk into a Starbucks to order a coffee, and if you vibrate good feelings to um, the person serving you or at the cash register, you could just see them change. You could see their attitude, their tone. It just changes. That's a vibration. That's a real thing. That's not, and we can do that. And he talked about it as in relationship to we're evolving from a 2D, but a 3D. We're in a 3D world now where it's
Mm-hmm.
becoming 5D, where these other senses are starting to pick up, and that we're becoming more aware of this. I also thought that this was really interesting about human evolution, where it's all going. It says at the moment right now things are kind of chaotic because this is all new information and we're connected in ways we've never been connected before around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to talk about politicians and politics just for the moment without making a whole conversation about politics and leaders and the mindset of a leader, particularly a political leader. Just think let's just know, just in the last couple of days, right? The conflict with Iran. I saw I don't know, we call him the president or whatever, the leader of him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and not by just looking at him was one thing, but he just came out and said it what our belief system is to remove Israel from planet Earth. That's not it's not a threat. It's just that's what they're going to do. His belief system that Israel needs not to exist on the planet, no
Mm-hmm.
matter what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a mindset. That is that's way beyond that. He is never going to change the way he believes.
An ideology. Yeah.
It's an ideology and a mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and it's no different than Putin with Russia or other countries, because it turns out that the human brain, um, the DNA, the way it's actually created is of course, it's a particle, but part of our DNA is our past traumas, and that's
Mm-hmm.
generational. So that you cannot change that. That's who you are. So let's just take the current leaders right now, uh, and I'll speak especially in America leaders. They their mindset is based on envy. So they either envy somebody else, jealousy, or seeking power. They want to control other people. They want to
Mm-hmm.
control the thoughts of other people. That's the way humans are just by nature, but that's how they lead. And that possibly we can move to a place where it's not just about that. It's not just a win lose. There could be a win win, and and then how that ties into one of Einstein's favorite famous quotes, right? Life's an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on the relationship between time and space, because it's all an illusion. The whole thing is it's the what the mind is, and yeah, fascinating stuff. It goes.
Well, I think the one of the things that I want to go back to, you said it, that there's nothing we can do about that in terms of past traumas, and I think that whether that's what you meant or not is irrelevant.
Yeah,
What
thank
I,
you. That's not what I meant, but
yeah.
totally appreciate where you're going with this. What it
Well,
meant is the self-thought and self-awareness, being
yeah,
aware of those and
yeah,
not repeating them to make a better world.
yeah.
Thank you for the correction.
If you do the self-awareness work and the
Yes.
self-reflection work to identify what those things might be,
Yep.
then you do have the power to influence those by
Mhm.
not getting rid of them, in my estimation, as much as kind of compartmentalizing them and say, look, that was a limiting belief of mine or a
Mhm.
blocker of mine. Let's say it was money because I was raised by parents that were born during the Depression, so scarcity was just a thing. Well,
Mhm.
I can move myself into a state of abundance, but
Yep.
not until I identify the fact that I have this predisposition to scarcity and that I want more of an abundant mindset. Now
Mhm.
there's work I can do to move from one to the other, but not until I recognize that that's the case. That's my
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah, it was interesting. He was telling his personal story. So he grew up in the South, a black guy, and he grew up really, really poor. And he was talking about how he changed his mindset. He said, I don't want this. I don't want this to happen to me again." And obviously, he created a business and made it, lost everything, but it was his self awareness and his ability to change his circumstances all through these affirmations. I think that's the technique we all have. We don't use it all the time, but it's your self thought based on your self doubt and then your self belief system. That's
Well,
always going on, and you can interrupt that by
that's a great word. Yeah, you
yeah,
can interrupt that conversation. I've
you
heard,
can,
and
yeah.
I wish I remembered the exact quote, but it was Sam Harris, who's a pretty well known philosopher and a PhD researcher, writer. He talks about all this stuff. He's a very smart guy. He's also an atheist, which is interesting because
Mhm.
he talks to religious scholars about
Mhm.
religion in the context of all of this higher power. But he started out a TED talk one time years ago by saying something to the effect of, if we talk to other people on the street like we talk to ourselves, all we do all day is get into fights because we're
Interesting.
so mean to ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
100% true.
yeah, well, I started writing because our whole podcast is based on on self-awareness,
Yep.
on these 5 areas of your life, and the number one that uh, we don't mention enough on the podcast, but is self-forgiveness.
Mm,
You have to forgive yourself for the past,
yep.
uh, because if you can't forgive yourself for the past, you'll never get out of your own way. Your
Yeah.
belief system won't change, and I haven't tried it yet, but the technique was affirmations. Like if you say the same thing 10 times every morning for 10 days, you can actually change. You can interrupt that thought with an
The brain
affirmation.
chemistry. Yeah. Yeah. It's like
Yeah,
chanting, I suppose,
yeah, it would be. Yeah.
you can go back and find rituals in different cultures that
Uh-huh.
they'll call it different things, but it's exactly what you're talking about. It's
Yeah.
the reinforcement of a specific thought to overcome the presence of another thought.
Yeah.
And I think that's, dude, the recognition that we have control over this is astounding to me. And
Yeah.
my recognition has been gradual over time, starting with some, like I said, my little league experience, but really not until the last few years. And I'm going to reflect on why that took place a couple of years ago, at a later point. But I think that, yeah, I think the most important thing is this idea. Like when I coach people in the professional world, it's like, what can you control and what do you have no control over?
Mhm.
Well, I personally felt for most of my life that I didn't really have much control over this. I was who I was. I could work, I could exercise, I could play sports, I'm going to have a family, I'm going to have kids. I had this expectation of what life was going to be. And I also thought I came from that proverbial family with a white picket fence. Well, that fucking blew up in my 20s, right? There was no white picket fence. This is far from perfect. And I got all kinds of shit going on in my brain that I don't like. So all of a
Yeah.
sudden I can control some of that. That was wonderful. Now
Yeah.
it's practice.
Yeah, well, there's something that we talk about it, maybe not as much, and you've admitted it. I've tried to be transparent about it. is this past traumas, not as that you want to go back and bring back these back memories and just it's to bring it back, deal with it, and move on, and forgive
Mm-hmm.
yourself for it. And I do think as we get into different stages of our life, if we don't go back and deal with that, then it does hold us back more than we realize it. That self-talk, that self-doubt
100%.
is
Yep.
starting to, and that becomes our belief system.
100%. And you know what else is kind of interesting that just popped into my head? Because as you know, I've got three young adult kids,
Yeah.
is as my children got older and they crossed that chasm of childhood to adulthood, which sometimes is a couple of years, it's not a day, and they begin to come back to you and talk to you about the things you talk to them, at least my kids, and I don't
Yeah.
want to say I'm sure about yours because I don't know, maybe yes, maybe no. They share with me what my limiting beliefs are. They share with me what my biases are and what my prejudices are, even if they're unconscious. And they're like, "Dad, were you aware that you just said that? Were you aware that you're giving off that vibe?" I'm like, "No, but thank you. Let me modify my behavior a little bit." So when you start having people come back to you that are reaffirming this kind of stuff, yeah, I mean, I tell people all the time, one of the things I learned from both of my daughters in the divorce and after the divorce was how to become a much better listener. But
Mm.
that was me acknowledging that they need me to listen better. I need to get better at listening. They don't want me to fix everything. So I had this whole system in my head where I'm fixing everything. I know how to do this. I'm the guy that takes care of stuff. I'm the dad. I got that from my dad. Some of that's really good, but some of it really did need to be quote unquote reprogrammed. So outside influences are big too, if you're paying attention.
Yeah. Again, I'm just reflecting on this conversation because I think sometimes we learn more from a third party story than we do from our own story because we're so
Mm-hmm.
close to our own story. You will see yourself or your mistakes or successes within another party, and
Mm-hmm.
he spoke about that. He spoke about his first marriage and what he did wrong, not just what they did wrong, and then his environments that he had to remove himself from these environments as a child. He knew that. He went back and was like, "Why are you people still here?" But also the environments of a toxic woman in his life.
Mm-hmm.
That was an environment that he had to, and it traumatized him. He didn't have a relationship for years because that was the environment he was in. He never dealt with it. It was creating problems in his other relationships. These are things that we're all dealing with this.
Well, and as we age, these things take on different forms, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe so much that they don't become so much uh, ingrained in who we are and what we think that we don't even think about them, and then we're gone. That's it, right?
yeah,
It
I don't know
also,
about,
but by the way, not to interrupt you, I just want to get this one thought out.
yep.
He also was saying how that they know, this is science, back to science. They know that those thoughts are directly related to cancer and
Mm-hmm.
to stomach issues and all these other things. That the connection between the thought and the physical well-being is directly related.
You know, Jim, it's again, I'm not I bring up my dad a lot, but he's just, I mean, when you say what you just said, I can't not mention the guy. He's 96 years old, and I've said, I've talked to my children about this. I've talked to myself about this, my all my loved ones, anybody who I know, love, and trust, because we're all seeking this secret or this key, if you will, to happiness or fulfillment. And I like the phrase peace of mind because that's what it is. It's like my mind is calm, my mind is at peace. I don't know anyone with the peace of mind he has, and I can connect it directly to everything we just talked about, and primarily this issue of faith, which we talked about a
Sure.
little bit. But if you have faith, then you can connect to all these other techniques that we talked about: meditation, prayer, visualization, you know,
Yep.
self-talk. All of these are part of that faith thing, which is like, well, I can't see it or touch it. I'll never meet that thing, that guy, whatever that is, but I know he's there and I know something's going on that's bigger than me. And there's
Yeah.
something to be said for that, because if you can tap into that, I think that's the best way to peace of mind. Although I do believe it isn't a destination. I believe it is a journey.
Yeah. I would agree. And I somewhat have grown to envy people that have that faith in them. I don't have that connection with a particular faith system. And I'm now realizing the importance of that, because it does get you to that place, whether again it's through meditation. But when you have that faith, I think you can go to even deeper level, that whether it's Hindu or Buddhism or Catholic or whatever that is, and that's a journey.
Well, it's an interesting thing, because if I may share my more recent experiences, it going back to the exercise analogy. It's like, if I don't give that faith, if I don't, in my case, if I don't give God a little love and attention every day, that muscle weakens just a little bit, right? And so, and I think that's purposeful. I think it's God, in my estimation, it's God's way of saying, no, 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 no. Just because you prayed yesterday doesn't mean you can get away with not praying today. Come back and talk to me, and keep coming back, because I'm listening. It's like that movie, Oh God, with George Burns and John Denver years ago. The last line of the movie, he says, well, George Burns is God, and he's walking away. They're never going to talk again. And John Denver goes, hey, can we talk? And George Burns turns around. He's got a cigar in his mouth. He's dressed in a safari outfit. He goes, you talk, I'll listen. And then he just walks away, you know?
Yeah.
So that faith thing is pretty powerful. But I think, Jim, to kind of start wrapping it up, I think you hit on the nail on the head. That we got science on this now. This is not just faith. It's not just woo woo. It's not just concept. We have proof this shit
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. One last thought about the science of this. He talked about the human brain, and the development of the human brain, the part of a human being, right? Just the brain itself. So it turns out that it's created between the ages of right around 6 and 8, yeah, that's the actual brain. That's who you are. That's like your default hard drive of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's we were born with that. That was given to you in your DNA. That kind of
Mm-hmm.
came to you as far as what you started with, and then it started to develop based on how the brain is. I've talked about this before. I just didn't know the science about it. I know at 10 years old, I would often say we have a default uh, either a default belief system based on a movie genre, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that has to do with what's going on in your life. If you've got a lot of drama or the household you're in or the environment you're in,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll go into life thinking it's a uh, melodrama, sci-fi, whatever it is, a horror movie, a comedy movie. Then that's your personality. That
Mm-hmm.
starts to get created around 10. So it turns out that there is science that is how the human brain develops. So
Well, I
if you
also
can
think
go
there's,
back and make these adjustments, you can do
yeah,
it.
no, you're right. I've heard different people talk about what age this happens and what age that
Yep.
happens, that we're formed very, very early on. But I've also
Yeah.
heard interesting scientific dialogue about what happens to boys as they become men. And I can't remember what part of the brain it is, but it's the
Yeah.
decision making part of the brain. And
Interesting.
that's not fully developed until we're like in our mid to late 20s. And
Yes.
as soon as I first heard that, I went back to all the fucking stupid decisions I made as a teenager and a 20 fucking 2-year old. I'm like, somebody could have
Yeah.
told me that. You don't have any decision making ability right now, so stop making stupid decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how the brain is forming. It's connecting the
Yep.
logic with the emotion. And that is developing, right, like you said, into their 20s. This is the
Yeah.
human brain. The physical body may be fully developed, but that's why teenage boys act the way they are. They're
Yeah.
fearless, and they're funny. They can do a lot of things. That's because their brains, they're not overthinking things. They
Yeah.
don't have
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
trauma in them is at that stage yet.
Yeah.
That
And
comes later when they
yeah,
get.
nobody told me that wasn't going to last.
Yeah.
But
So
no, I think I think what I would like to leave anybody listening that might resonate with them is back to this idea that there's so much available information about this now. There are so many people that are talking about this that know what they're talking about. There's so many credible resources that if you have a feeling that you have room for improvement, and I can't imagine anyone who doesn't feel at least a little bit of that, or you're a little bit sadder than you want to be, or not as fulfilled as you want to be, or you're not sleeping the way, I mean, anything that has to do with your mind, there's you can work on this. You can go to the proverbial mind gym. It's
Mhm.
available to you now. So
Yeah.
we're not scientists, we're not philosophers, but we've done a lot of self-experimenting here and a lot of investigation. And if we can find out this stuff, anybody can. So if you're curious and any of this resonated with you, go look some of this shit up. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah. All right, Mark.
Thanks,
Until
Jimbo.
next week.
All right. See you,
All
man.
right.